Welcome you all for this sixth lecture in the Democracy Dialogue series. Our guest today is Comrade Dipankar Bhattacharya. He is General Secretary of CPIML Liberation. We're extremely thankful for him that he accepted our invite despite his busy schedule. Comrade Dipankar doesn't need any introduction. He has been active in the left politics for the last 4 decades, and he has been General Secretary of the CPIML Liberation for last 22 years. He started his political work, left activities when he in early 80s, and he was Secretary of All India it came, and in that Comrade Dipankar assumed leadership of his party unanimously. Then he has been leading his party since then. As the abstract of the speech, which we have shared with all of you, makes it clear. The theme of this speech is today's speech is fascism, democracy, and the left. Comrade Dipankar Bhattacharya feels that the present phase as the rise of the instead of talking about historical details of fascism, it's important today for us today that present phase as the rise of the Indian model of fascism and resist it with all our might. And secondly, the interesting point which makes it has made in his abstract, in the midst of the fascist offensive, the left in India must emerge and assert as the most consistent and reliable champion of democracy. Before I request Comrade Dipankar to deliver this lecture, this talk, here are a few suggestions from our side. Please share your comments and questions in the chat box. It will help us a lot if you enter your contact details also in the chat box, so that you can get further detailed updates of the Democracy Dialogue series. And please like or subscribe to our NSI page. So please welcome Comrade Dipankar Bhattacharya for his speech. Comrade, you are mute. You are mute. Please.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yeah.
So, thank you, Comrade Subhash, and a very good evening to all of you listeners. It's really an honor for me to be invited by your organization for this lecture on this important topic. And as you rightly remembered, the journey of our party and Comrade VM's untimely demise. So in fact, 18 December, I still remember the Central Committee meeting when he passed away. And this 18 December, every year 18 December, we observe it as Sankalp Divas party to renew our revolutionary pledge. And this year also, we, across the party, across India, we did again renew our pledge. And today is just 2 days before today. So anyway, I will try and speak for maybe some 40-45 minutes. I hope that's okay. Then we will have ample time for discussion.
You can talk for 1 hour also, Comrade.
1 hour. Please. 1 hour is a bit too long for me, but okay, yeah.
Please.
I think. In fact, thank you again for suggesting the topic. I think it covers important points which are of utmost concern to all of us today. I think all of us who observe Indian politics closely and who also participate in this whole process of democratic movement, I think all of us have this common feeling that now we are passing through a phase which has absolutely no parallels in Indian history, in modern Indian politics. So this is a completely unprecedented kind of, and a few features they really stand out, and I think there can be absolutely no debate, no confusion about any of these features. Number one is the growing and very complete open mockery of the constitution, of the parliamentary democratic system, subversion of when the farmers are protesting and people are more and more people are joining protests, so they have cancelled the winter session of parliament. And the Niti Aayog chairman, he complained that we have too much of democracy in the country. So nothing could be more explicit than this. And in fact, very symbolically, a new parliament building now is being built. So we are having a new building of parliament, and we are having this complaint that there is too much of democracy, and this farmers' protest makes it very clear. The ordinances came in early June. Then we had the bills, and then we had this hurriedly passed law in September. But if you look at the infrastructure with the Adanis have been building, this has been going on for last 2-3 years. So the actual infrastructural foundations and the understanding between the corporate houses and the government, that has been forged way back, so 2-3 years ago. And the bills and the laws and all these legislation, they are just a formality to convert the actual memorandum of understanding between the government and the corporate houses into some kind of legislation. So this is what people are commonly today calling Adani Ambani Raj, or company Raj in India. And I think this has done a very good service, because many people are often complaining when we used to talk about corporate globalization and corporate rule. The corporate sounds very kind of, doesn't really resonate in Indian ears. So when we say corporate, many people don't understand what is corporate all about. So Punjab farmers, they have done a very proper Indian translation of the word corporate. Corporate means Adani and Ambani. Adani Ambani Raj, company Raj. So that is corporate, and I think it resonates in the ears of every Indian farmer, way back to the East India Company, from East India Company Raj to today's corporation Raj or corporate Raj or Adani Ambani company Raj. I think it is very clear today. So we have this unchecked corporate aggression. Thirdly, what we have is unprecedented kind of communal polarization. Absolutely nothing is free from communal polarization. You talk about everything, there will immediately be a Hindu-Muslim angle to it. So everything is subjected to communal polarization and complete marginalization of minorities and Muslims in particular, and not just marginalization but also persecution, and persecution of any kind of dissent. So this communal polarization and persecution of Muslims and ideological dissenters, it's very clear. Then we have a new discourse of nationalism, where the government becomes the nation. It's the Modi government which knows the best what is good for the nation. So if you are critical of the government, then you are considered to be anti-national. And now BJP, again, it is the only party, and it's party which kind of defines Hindus. So if you are critical of BJP, you are also a Hindu hater. So this kind of definition, so if you are critical of the government, then you are anti-national, you are part of the Tukre gang. And if you are critical of the BJP, then you are, by definition, a Hindu hater, you are an anti-Hindu. Now this discourse, this we and they, I mean, this is again very symptomatic of our present situation. Now, these are all things, and then we have the mob lynching squads, the kind of privatization of violence. It is not just the state which monopolizes violence today, but you have all kinds of private militia rampaging Indian streets. So now these are all features which define the present central government, the present political juncture in the country, the Modi rule, so to say. And I think we can, I mean, there can be no debate about it, no doubt about it. But if you add up all these features, they add up to something which in history we used to know as fascism. So way back in the first half of 20th century in Europe, it was called fascism. Now, of course, I know that many people still probably they are debating whether we should call it fascism in India or should give it some other name. But I think fascism, of course, I mean, it gets different names in different countries. So fascism is the original term. It's the generic term. By the time it kind of unleashed itself fully in Germany, it had already got a new name. So it was no longer fascism, it was already Nazism, National Socialism. And those were the days when probably it could have been nothing else but some kind of socialism, because socialism was so fashionable in the early 20th century. So I think it's very clear that fascism will get different names in different contexts, in different era, different situations, different national kind of background. So in India, you can call it anything. I think it doesn't matter really. You call it Moditwa, you call it Hindutva, call it even Acharian, call it by any name. So just as Shakespeare says that rose, call it by any name, it will be as fragrant as a rose. So call India's fascism by any name, but the fangs of this fascism and the venom of this fascism, it is unmistakable. So I think that's why I prefer to call it, if we have any problem with the word fascism, let's call it the Indian version, the Indian model of fascism, and give it any name, but let's not miss the essence of it. Let's not miss the content of it, which is absolutely unmistakable today. Now, this, I think, so I think what we should now do is take a quick look at the trajectory of the rise of this whole Indian fascism. And this trajectory, of course, it goes back to nearly 100 years. So the trajectory of this Indian fascism, it begins with the inception of the RSS party. Way back in 1925. And incidentally, so the European fascism and Indian RSS, they were actually rising in the same time. At the same time, and these Indian fascists, the Indian version of this fascism, the ideological genesis, it actually drew inspiration from, it modeled itself on the Italian experience. Drew inspiration from Hitler. So it's not like something unconnected, something disconnected. So it is basically the same European model of fascism which had its Indian echo. And in India, people who drew inspiration during those days, I mean, they talked about nationalism, all kinds of Indian nationalists, they are fighting British colonial rule then. So they never had to look for any German nationalist model to define Indian nationalism. So people were fighting by whatever means available, whatever weapons they had. But it is only the RSS which had to look to Germany, Bismarck, and Mussolini and Hitler for their inspiration of what they call nationalism. So that is the ideological genesis, and I think it's very important to note that this is for close to a century. This is an uninterrupted ideological continuity. So uninterrupted growth and spread of this ideology, and this ideology as a mass movement, mobilization of uninterrupted mobilization of the masses. So I think this is a very crucial thing in understanding today's Indian fascism. Often many people will talk about a lot of aspects of Modi government, but they will miss this whole RSS history, of century-long history. So this is, I think, number one. And of course, the only thing is, during the freedom movement, the RSS was a marginal force. When communalism, of course, grew and eventually led to the partition of the country, the freedom got fragmented in India. We got a fractured, fragmented kind of freedom. But RSS was there, Hindu Mahasabha was there. But I think in the given environment of early 20th century, the global climate, which was dominated by Russian Revolution and all anti-colonial struggles then, and given the political social balance of forces within India, the Hindu nationalism, the Hindu supremacist kind of politics couldn't gain the upper hand. So it remained a marginal force. And in fact, after the assassination of Gandhi, which was the first major terrorist killing in India soon after independence, I think they became even more isolated. So RSS became isolated and rather marginalized, had to go underground when India began its journey after independence. But then we know that it got major breaks, and it used all those breaks to secure greater legitimacy for itself. Now, there have been moments where, of course, RSS became banned, but more importantly, I think if you look at the moments which gave RSS more space, more legitimacy, and more kind of share of state power, and it made the best, it used it to the hilt. So the first chance was, of course, 1962, and that period when India-China war happened, and then even Nehru, he felt the need to legitimize RSS, so that whole Republic de Paris, when RSS was invited, we all know. So that was probably the first break that the RSS got, the first shot at securing some kind of mainstream legitimacy. Then came this whole emergency in 1977. It was accepted by a section of Indian communists then, but of course that was a very false alarm. But it's true that the whole JP movement and the eventual emergence of the Janata Party, it gave the Jansangh and the RSS a very major break. The first major break, first major shot at state power in the center, when Vajpayee became a minister, Advani became a minister. And every time they got these opportunities, I think they managed to subvert the institutions, penetrate all the institutions, plant their ideas, plant their people in key positions of India's bureaucracy, judiciary, media, and everywhere. So, and they have gone on accumulating their strength. So 77 was the second major moment. Then came 1989, that whole anti-Bofors movement of VP Singh, and they made use of that. And I think this whole Ayodhya campaign. So just with Ayodhya, probably it would not have been possible if they also at the same time didn't have that opportunity provided by that anti-Bofors movement and the VP Singh government. So that was another break. Then came the next point when Vajpayee became the prime minister. And again, you found that they formed the NDA. So they said that all these contentious issues, all those disputed points of RSS agenda, we are shelving them almost like indefinitely. I will say 2014, Narendra Modi's first arrival in Delhi, that was not immediately on the back of an RSS agenda. That was with achieving and development, rapid development, and so on and so forth. So I think if you look at all these moments, so RSS and the continuous uninterrupted rise and growth of RSS, the spread of RSS ideology, coupled with all these junctures where the RSS managed to secure legitimacy for itself and immobilize more and more sections of the people. And of course, now today, it is a very unique kind of juncture in Indian politics where, by a quirk of history, I think they have grabbed a kind of vacuum in Indian politics. When at the same time, you will find that across the board, the entire Indian political spectrum, if you look at it, most of the parties are today at their lowest point. The Congress, it is in utter disarray, and it is, I don't know how it is going to sort of revive itself, or if it can at all reinvent itself. You talk about the left, even for the CPM and for the CPI, I think these are their lowest points in history for the CPI and CPI both. We are the two big communist parties in India, big parties of the Indian left. Then you talk about the regional parties. You talk about the regional parties, almost all of these regional parties, they have either been subsumed by the BJP or they are ready to play a subservient role. They are ready to do business with the BJP. You talk about the social justice camp, but for maybe a few exceptions, like to an extent the RJD in Bihar, or maybe to a little extent the Samajwadi Party. Almost all these sections of these social justice parties, now they have been sort of again subsumed. Like if you have RJD, you also have JDU. If you have some of the Dalit parties still opposing, then you have LJP, you have Jitendra Maji's party, you have Ramdas Athawale's party, any number of Dalit parties, so-called Dalit parties in India, which are in the NDA fold. So you have this kind of a juncture where the BJP has grabbed, and you look at what's happening in West Bengal. The TMC is disintegrating, and even the BJP is in a position to engineer defections in TMC and buy over some chunks of TMC bases. So this kind of political vacuum, I think, and the BJP and the RSS, for them it is a now or never kind of moment. So they have sensed their moment, they have grabbed their moment, they have smelt blood, so and they are not going to stop anywhere now. So having grabbed this opportunity, I think now they at breakneck speed they are doing, and especially the advent of Modi too. So you can see, the sense of urgency, the sense of desperation, the speed with which they are doing things. So absolutely no waiting game anymore. So look at the economic things, privatization, corporate capture of agriculture, privatization of railways, the restructuring of banks, the entire financial sector, Kashmir, Ram Mandir, everything. So the entire agenda, almost the whole agenda has been it's now open, and this whole agenda is being implemented breakneck kind of speed. So this is, I think, what's happening now. And of course, a few things in the international climate, I should also mention that, which basically have definitely favored the fascists in India to grow. The post-Soviet global situation, the whole neoliberal economic policies. So you have a lot of the BJP work, which actually, for example, if you talk about the corporate plunder and corporate aggression today, so every time we are reminded that it is Manmohan Singh who actually started it. It's true. It's the economic policies that started in 1991. So all the things which the Congress started, BJP has a ready-made platform. So all that they have to do is to just take the next quantum jump. So take the next leap and take it to a totally new level. So there is, of course, privatization and privatization. So there can be some kind of regulated privatization, somewhat, and there can be completely unchecked kind of privatization, which is happening now. So, and then the third thing is the global climate of Islamophobia. And after Soviet collapse, and especially 9/11 and after that. And so earlier in India, we had the local roots of communalism. So communalism, it has its local roots, it has its local history, but now coupled with global Islamophobic environment, this whole terrorism and all its, whatever followed from it. So this has given a new kind of environment to the RSS and the BJP to build on. So this is, I think, this is the way in which I will look at the whole trajectory and how we have arrived at this moment. Ambedkar also provides us with a vantage point of, very insightful vantage point of making sense of what is happening today. And way back, when the Constitution was being adopted and everybody else was very euphoric. Nehru was euphoric, everybody was euphoric about after the arrival of freedom. But Ambedkar was certainly not at all euphoric. And he was telling us that there are very major fundamental concerns. Now, if you look at read Ambedkar again, revisit him, and if you look at his warnings, so I think all these warnings now become much more sensible today to us. I'll just mention 4 or 5 warnings which Ambedkar issued right at the moment when the Constitution was being adopted. So first thing Ambedkar tells us that this whole Constitution, it gives us political equality, electoral equality, one vote for every citizen. But this electoral equality, you just have to keep in mind that you have social inequality and economic inequality. And it tells us that if this whole social and economic inequality, if they will keep growing, then pitted against growing social and economic inequality, this electoral equality will lose on its meaning. So this is something which we are experiencing now. So inequality is growing socially, inequality growing equally, economically, and we have the electoral equality which is increasingly becoming just possible. Then Ambedkar tells us about, let's say, the democracy, the Constitution, he says, is the top dressing of democracy on an Indian soil, which is essentially undemocratic. So undemocratic soil, and you have a top dressing of democracy. So there is a very fundamental contradiction there. So this fundamental contradiction is either you democratize the soil, you go on democratizing the Indian social soil, and then of course there will be some less of a mismatch. So, but if you don't do that, if the social soil is not democratized, then definitely the undemocratic social soil and the the constitutional top dressing of democracy, this contradiction, it won't survive for long. So this contradiction will then be resolved in a very fascistic way, where that undemocratic social soil, this will completely throw away the constitution, which is what is happening today. So that whole social soil, this is democratization of social soil, which Ambedkar emphasized and which have remained neglected in India. Then Ambedkar tells us about, bhakti. He says bhakti in politics, religion, it can be a road to salvation. But bhakti in politics, personality cult, hero worship, that is the surest way to dictatorship. That is the end of democracy and the surest invitation recipe for dictatorship, which happened partly during Indira Gandhi's period when emergency, Indira is India and India is Indira. And today, of course, it has reached an altogether new level. And finally, that very explicit warning, which Ambedkar says that if India is ever to become a Hindu Raj, so that will be the greatest calamity to befall India. And he had, of course, his own experience, and he knew what he was talking about. He knew that within Hinduism, the social history of Hinduism, there has been complete social slavery, and so the Brahminical domination, the caste order. But unfortunately, in India, even Ambedkar was never really accepted as a freedom fighter. So the way we always defined our freedom movement, so you look at any textbook, you talk to anybody about freedom fighters, they will name everybody else, but Ambedkar will be conspicuously absent. Because in our understanding, freedom was all about freedom from imperialism, how to end British rule. So maybe Ambedkar didn't say much about how to end British rule. So he was focusing more on what will be free India like, what will be the kind of the constitution, what will be the society like. And even Bhagat Singh was doing the same thing. Bhagat Singh was, of course, telling us both how to achieve freedom. So he had his own way of winning freedom. And he was telling us what kind of society, what should free India look like. So Ambedkar too was telling us that. So now these were Bhagat Singh and Ambedkar. So I think often we think that these two visions are probably separate visions, and they two are two totally different streams, and the two can never meet. I think it's probably not historically correct. So there was a period in Indian freedom movement when Ambedkar was leading the ILP, Indian Independent Labour Party. So Ambedkar had formed a Labour Party in India, Independent Labour Party, where he was saying that the casteism, I mean the Brahminical domination, Brahmanism and the bourgeois rule, capitalism, are the twin targets for India's working class movement. So for the Indian proletariat, Ambedkar has his own way of looking at the proletariat. He had his own definition. But I think that was the best period, the most potent period after Bhagat Singh, 1940s, 30s and 40s. Not just what the communists were doing, but the possibility when communists and ILP, they were fighting together in Maharashtra for the textile workers. And Ambedkar was fighting for all those progressive legislations for the working class, the labor laws. So, but somehow it was short-lived and it's very unfortunate, and eventually the two streams became totally different. But I think today, to fight fascism, we need to again somehow revisit Ambedkar and again reimagine the Indian left movement and bring together these two streams where the social, even Phule for that matter, he talked about social slavery. So that social slavery, the Ambedkar talks about annihilation of caste. And when he talks about annihilation of caste, I think that's a very, very important cardinal principle. It's a very radical call for a really, if you have to think about a modern secular democratic India, if you have to think of a socialist vision for India, caste annihilation, I think it's a very important concept. It's a very radical cardinal call for that kind of a thing. And these are things which have remained, which have been forgotten. I mean, a lot of Ambedkarites, they have totally forgotten. They have reduced Ambedkar to only reservation and maybe just some kind of constitutional rights for the minorities and for Dalits. But there is much more in Ambedkar. So I think now the real thing is, so if you look at historically, what happened is during the freedom movement, we had all these important visions. So we had Bhagat Singh, we had Ambedkar, and we also had, let's say, RSS and Hindu Mahasabha. They were never part of the freedom movement, but these were the visions, ideologies which also grew, which also were born and grew in that same environment, in that same period. Now, what happened is, in 1947, India arrived at some kind of a balance between the two. So the Ambedkar's vision, the communist vision, they also couldn't come to the forefront. They also couldn't come to the center. RSS, Hindu Mahasabha remained marginalized, and some kind of a mean was arrived at. Let's call it the Nehruvian mean. So Gandhi, Nehru, and that Nehruvian mean, even in spite of, but still, I think it was good that there was a communal polarization. The country was partitioned, but Indian nationalism was still not defined exclusively in Hindu terms. So, and we managed to find some kind of a soft secular definition for Indian nationalism, and we managed to, get a constitution, which is probably the biggest gain of the whole freedom movement, biggest concrete gain of the freedom movement, apart from the values of freedom movement, apart from the vision of democracy, the constitution in concrete terms, with especially the preamble, which promised, which gave us this whole definition of Indian republic as something we, the people of India. So it is not drawn from any other source. It is the people of India declaring India as a republic, and then promising equality and justice and freedom and liberty and fraternity for all citizens. No, I think that is the thing. So today, in fact, that balance that 1947 had given us, the freedom movement had given us, that balance has been overturned. And this balance has been overturned, and now we find that Hindu supremacist current, which was a marginal force, which could not come to the center stage during the freedom movement period, that has somehow made use of this juncture, and in a different environment, and much later. It took them 90 years to reach this stage, but now they have reached that stage. And so when we say that we have to save India doesn't mean that you can somehow just restore the old balance. So I think restoration of the old balance, restoration of the old Gandhi-Nehru mode of Congress, restoration of the way, let's say, India was there till the arrival of BJP, the India of the 1950s or 60s or 70s or even 80s, I think that restoration is not possible. That restoration is not possible. So we have to find balance on a higher plane. So if the old balance has been done away with, if it has been overturned, and if the Hindu right, if the Hindu supremacist forces, they have come to the center stage, and if you have to push them back again to the margin, if you have to overcome them, I think we have to find a new balance, higher plane. And that balance, that's where the crucial role of the left lies. So it is, so when we are saying that save India, we also mean transform India. When you say defend the constitution, we also mean defend democracy, we also mean deepen democracy. So defending and deepening, saving and transforming, they will go hand in hand. And I was talking to comrades in Bengal. So when I said that the BJP coming to power in Bengal will be the worst kind of disaster to happen in Bengal. And so that disaster management and so our politics is the politics of social transformation, of political transformation. So the politics of transformation that should also have this whole component of, let's say, disaster management. So when a disaster is happening in the country, we cannot just be talking about, our own ideal way of transformation. So we have to operate in the given situation. So in the given situation, how to arrest this disaster, how to stop the disaster, and how to then, having arrested it, how to reverse it, and then how to build, how to transform. So I think rather than looking at all this in a piecemeal manner, pit one against the other, we have to look at all this as a holistic whole, as an integral kind of project. So where that's why this is the call of revolution. So the call of revolution, when the call of revolution can be when you are faced with a revolutionary situation. If you think that you have a revolutionary environment, you go for the revolution. And when you are in the face of a fascist counter-revolution, you find a fascist kind of project, complete set of fascist takeover, then you do everything possible to stop that takeover. So that is as much a revolutionary act as anything else. So a lot of people will just think that, well, this is just some kind of reformist act, or this is just some kind of pragmatic or some very opportunist. Often people say that you are making compromise on your ideology when you are talking about disaster management. And let's say we join hands with the RJD, we did the Congress, the electoral battle in Bihar. So many people ask me that you are actually making compromise on your ideology. I say absolutely not. We are actually answering the demands of our ideology. This is what the ideology demands. This is not a compromise on ideology, because if you just say that ideology is something which is only which is valid for you only in revolutionary situations, so how do you face a counter-revolutionary situation? So an ideology which only talks to you about revolution, which doesn't tell you how to fight against fascism, materials, you have to work. So I think this is why that is the demand of the ideology today for the left, for the Marxists, to find our fate in the situation and emerge as the biggest defender of democracy. Now, that's, of course, one big thing. Today, the battle is on various planes. And before I come to, I'm almost coming to the end of my talk. But before I wind up with the role of the left, let me tell you that often people are saying that we have hardly any opposition today. So if you look at the election results, if you look at the assembly proceedings and parliament proceedings, the presence of opposition in the parliament and the electoral arena, of course, it will appear true that there is a very limited kind of opposition space. But if we are looking at the people on the ground, I think that's a very important arena for us to look at. So ever since Narendra Modi came to power in 2014, so there has been absolutely no dearth of people's resistance. And in fact, I think that's the biggest most reassuring point about India's current politics and the future of Indian democracy, that the people have been on the ground. They have been fighting. They have been resisting. And all sections of the people. For example, you look at the students, look at the young India. It
Comrade, आपकी आवाज नहीं आ रही. Sorry. Comrade Dipankar, we are not able to hear you. I think there is some problem in the internet connection. It appears.
Political resistance from JNU, from universities, and our comrades actually came up with this whole slogan, "Naye Bharat ke vaste, Bhagat Singh Ambedkar ke raste." So that ideological movement, which is like something like the May 4th movement, let's say in Chinese revolutionary history. So the students, youth, the JNU, the Jadavpur, the Jamia, the universities, it started as some kind of an ideological awakening among students. And now, in this Bihar election, I found that it has become almost an upsurge of the youth around issues of employment, around issues of education, where students are actually being able to transcend caste barriers. It's a very reassuring thing. Students cutting across caste barriers, young India, voting for the left, voting on issues that matter to them, and rejecting both the BJP's established political wisdom, both Islamophobia as well as the whole caste, so-called false caste pride of the upper caste. So they are rejecting that. So that this you have this whole stand of student politics, young politics. Then you look at, let's say, the farmers' movement, of course, after the Mansoor police firing, the way the farmers' organizations came together as an all-India platform, and then a sustained movement. In fact, they had Pulwama not interrupted, not intervened, probably we would have seen the Lok Sabha election in a different way. And the farmers' issues would have become much more prominent during the Lok Sabha elections. But anyway, now we can see the farmers are writing a glorious chapter of our history. So it reminds us of almost 1857. 1857, when Delhi was encircled, when the farmers and their without uniform and peasants in uniform, they were kind of marching together, and that was what 1857 was all about. And 1857 reached Delhi, and today the farmers, they have encircled Delhi. So you use any metaphor. We in the ML movement, inspired by the Chinese Revolution, we have been talking about encircling cities, from villages. And if you look at it in 1857, then it is a reenactment of 1857, and it has to completely change the metaphor of BJP. We have been talking about the Jawans in the border per Sena. Today in Delhi, when you talk about border, so people mean Tikri border, they mean Singhu border, they mean Gazipur border, and it is a different kind of Sena in the border. It's the farmers, and they try to pit those farmers' sons in central paramilitary forces and the CRPF and BSF, but that whole attempt to pit the farmers' sons against their parents, that didn't succeed. So now this is the farmers' resistance, and of course this is now forcing across the spectrum all kinds of opposition forces to support the farmers' movement. I think the 8th December Bharat Bandh, it evoked a considerable response. Almost all opposition parties had to support it, and increasingly I think political parties will have to take a stand in this. Then this whole anti-CAA movement, I mean, it's unprecedented. Shaheen Bagh, the kind of protests that emerged from Shaheen Bagh, Muslim women cutting across generations, 3-4 generations of Muslim women, from our dadis and nanis to our children and grandchildren. I mean, that kind of we have never before, I think, seen such a spectacle. So nothing can be more reassuring and more energizing or inspiring a sight than seeing Shaheen Bagh. And that was not just one Shine Bagh, but in no time that one Shine Bagh replicated itself and it became dozens and then hundreds of Shine Baghs across. And today we find Kisan Shine Baghs. In a way, you can link the two. Today the farmers are also putting up their own Shine Bagh. So this whole Shine Bagh mode of protest, this whole and then, of course, the worker strikes. The worker strikes are again becoming, some people say it is an annual ritual that every year the central trade unions come together and call a day strike. Why can't we have indefinite strike? Why can't we have all kind of mass strikes like the European kind? I think, of course, we can hope for all that. But I think even whatever is happening, all these big strikes, I don't look at them as rituals, annual rituals. They are evoking considerable mass response. And it's a new working class which is now today asserting. It's the contract workers, it's the young workers, it's the scheme workers, it's the sanitation workers, first generation workers, women workers. So it's a new working class on the march in India today. And every year we find more and more people are joining the strike. So, and even our intelligentsia, our intellectuals, our public intellectuals, it's very, I mean, defiance is very risky now. Often you have to pay with your life, as Gauri Lankesh had to do, as many of our rationalists had to do, and as all our, from Gautam Navlakha, Anand Teltubre, and Sudha Bharadwaj, Barbara Rao, they are all in jail today. So, but they are going to jail. They are ready to take the lives of their risk. But they are our public intellectuals. I think even though the media in India is very weak, and I thank Punjab farmers for having identified, their targets well. So they have targeted the Modi government, they have targeted Adani Ambani Company Raj, and they have also made pinpointed the Goti media, this kind of vulgarization of the mainstream media. This is certainly an important target today. But having said that, I think we must salute all our media people and all our intellectuals, academics, who are actually, showing us the courage to say the right things, taking truth to power, and taking every risk. So, व्यक्ति का खतरा उठाना जिसको कहते हैं, तो जोखिम उठाना. So they are doing that because the freedom is never free. It doesn't come free. It comes with a cost. And if we have to, if you celebrate freedom, if we want to value our freedom, we must be prepared to pay all its costs. And so our people, intellectuals, they are telling us, showing us how to be ready to pay all the costs necessary. So I think this entire spectrum of resistance, now this is where the left must play a very key role in championing this resistance, in promoting this resistance, and it is not just in organizing this resistance. So I think that's a very important point, and I will end with it, organizing this whole resistance. So it is. It may often appear spontaneous. I think in every resistance in history, it has both elements. If it is not really spontaneous, if it doesn't, it is triggered by many factors. So if it doesn't evoke spontaneous kind of support response, then it remains limited. So it becomes truly powerful when there is an element of spontaneity. But then if you have to want to sustain it, and if you have to want to sharpen it, then definitely there has to be organization. And today, because if we look at this whole Modi rule only as in terms of Modi's personality, so-called charisma, or whatever, his oratory, his jumlas, then we just look at only part of this. So, and some people think that if only we could have another Modi, some kind of different Modi. People used to talk about revolutionary Gandhi earlier, that India needs a revolutionary Gandhi. India, maybe tomorrow, people, somebody in his oratory who can match Modi. There are actually without RSS. So, and RSS today, it has, whatever used to go with the communists, the kind of painstaking work, that kind of grassroots connect, that kind of, from away from the limelight, away from the social media, away from all this publicity, You go on year after year, go on working in the villages, in the workers' colonies, and they are, of course, doing it for their own purpose. They are to spread rumor, to spread hatred, to spread lies, but they are doing it for their own purpose. But they have copied, they have perfected what the communists should have done. And unfortunately, that old communist style of work in trade unions, in peasant organizations, in villages, in working class areas, in slums, that has become weak. And somehow all those electoral politics and the social media kind of new mode of articulation and new mode of presentation. So this thing, new mode of kind of smartness. So all these things are important. All these smart, clever, efficient. So smartness, cleverness, efficiency, everything is important, but nothing is more important than real, solid, painstaking work and real organization building. So that's where I think communists, it's only the communists who can bring this to this resistance. Because if you can't expect the Congress to do this, you can't expect any of the regional parties, any of these parties, personality-based, personality-oriented, without ideology, they can't lend that solidity. They can't lend that, So it is not just for the communists to lend ideological clarity. It is not just for us to lend courage and consistency or clarity. That, of course, the communists will have to do. That is the characteristic of communists. And many others are also doing it. But I think what is most crucial that the communists must bring to the table is that solid organization, that kind of tenacity, that stubbornness, that stubborn resistance. So I think once we start doing that, and to do that, I think we have to, again, even globally and even theoretically, we have to slightly reimagine communism. Somehow, the whole idea, the way socialism, because if you read Marx, if you go back to the Marxist classics, nothing is more profoundly democratic and emancipating than, Marxism, than all those basic classics. And the way communism grew, what was the Russian Revolution? It was against Tsarist autocracy. It was the people's upsurge for democracy against Tsarist autocracy. That was Russian Revolution and its essence. But somehow, then when they started building socialism, and socialism, which was supposed to be, which should have been superior to capitalism, not just in the economic terms, not just in terms of distribution and solving of unemployment or solving of poverty and hunger, but also a superior mode and model of democracy. But I think that's where socialism, was found wanting. By socialism, I mean the Russian model of socialism. And eventually, if socialism collapsed, one major reason was it collapsed because it couldn't prove to be democratically superior to whatever the bourgeois democracies were giving. And even today, look at China. So Chinese economy, of course, there can be many critics. But once again, I think the weakest point of China today is again the utter lack of democracy in China. So democracy as champion of democracy, I think that's what 21st century left movement has to be like. And in fact, after this whole COVID-19 crisis, today everybody talks about the unsustainability of capitalism. Completely unpredictable, chaotic, unsustainable. So there is a widespread hunger for some kind of yearning for some kind of a superior model. Call it socialism, call it anything else. But people are now increasingly realizing that this capitalist model is becoming increasingly unsustainable. And it is almost openly undemocratic. So democracy, bourgeois democracy, which used to be a strong point. So both welfare capitalism, welfare mode, and bourgeois democracy, both in economic and political terms. These are things which actually prove to be the sources of sustainability or stability of capitalism. So I think capitalism is losing its essential core points of stability, both in terms of people's, providing a semblance of welfare to the people, solving the basic issues to an extent, keeping hunger in check, keeping unemployment in check, giving some kind of fulfilling people's needs and aspirations to an extent, and not just manufacturing new aspirations, but also fulfilling them to an extent, and giving them a semblance of sense of participation or representation or some kind of, however vicarious it is, however superfluous it is, but giving them some sense that, well, this is meant for you, to the common people. But now I think these 2 points, capitalism is becoming increasingly now, these are the 2 big points of crisis for capitalism. You have Trump, you have this kind of capitalist rulers who are openly being undemocratic, and democracy, for them democracy is now unaffordable. So capitalism is becoming unsustainable, and democracy in its common sense is becoming unaffordable for capital. So when democracy becomes unaffordable for capital, so I think this is the time for socialists, for communists to again reassert and again take the lead, and not only just in terms of the economic model, but also in terms of democracy. And in fact, even in terms of India's own communist history. Now, these are the points when communists actually became popular. For example, in West Bengal, we have a long history of communist movement in West Bengal, from the days of Devaga and then freedom movement to Naxalbari, and after a long 34 years of left rule. But basically, what gave the main break to the CPIM in Bengal, that was the 6 years of Siddharth Sarkar race. You know what? Even the CPM used to call it semi-fascist terror. So that yearning for democracy and the need for some kind of restoration of democracy, and the CPM emerged as a vehicle for restoration of democracy in 1977. And they had electoral success beyond their own calculation, beyond their own dreams. And that's because Bengal needed democracy, and people had no other option. People trusted the communists, and they won on the strength of democracy. And then they did a few things, which, of course, like Operation Darga, the partial redistribution of land, Panchayati Raj, where they acquired a pro-peasant, pro-democratic image. And of course, that image was not totally empty. That image was backed by a degree of reality too. So, but then, unfortunately, if you look at the exit of the CPIM in 2011 in West Bengal, so it was precisely in the wake of Singur, Nandigram, and Lalgarh. So those 2 strong points of 1977 became the weak points. So your pro-peasant commitment and character, your pro-democracy potential and credential, that became suspect. And then you went out of power as being seen to be opposed to democracy, opposed to the farmers, opposed to the peasantry. And again, Mamata Banerjee came to power precisely by promising democracy, and precisely by promising land to the farmers and all that, with a lot of left posturing. But unfortunately, when she came to power, she unleashed a kind of anti-left violence. And today, that whole anti-left violence, it is seeking its logical culmination in the rise of the BJP. So, left has all along gained ground when it has been seen as a party fighting for democracy. Even in our own history, CPIM's own history, we found the biggest amount of mass support in Bihar, where the oppressed poor of Bihar, they own the party. So it is not that the party, from outside went to some villages of Bihar and tried to inject some kind of revolutionary ideology in the people. No, that's not how it works. So it works when the people take the message and they translate it in their own language and adapt it to their own needs. And that's how from Naxalbari, when the message came, and when in Bhojpur, in Ekwari, people battling against feudal coercion, against the basic denial of human dignity. So when they fought for human dignity, so CPIM grew as the vehicle for winning basic human dignity. The question of land, question of wages, question of political rights came much later. So it was just the basic dignity for the most oppressed people of Bihar. That's how CPI will emerge. That's how it gained in strength. And today, that dignity, it is now seeking a different level. So it was first, basically, if you go to Bhojpur and those areas, people will say that khatiya pe baithna bhi guna tha. I remember we were speaking to some of our old comrades once, and somebody asked them, "So what have we gained all these years to all these years of sacrifice and struggle?" And there was this old comrade who said, "Kuch nahi mila, bas khansne ki azadi mili." So just right to speak, right to just So these are the basic things, and then that dignity grew. That dignity grew in level because the dignity needs solid foundation. So from वो खांसने की आजादी या खटिया पे बैठने की आजादी to fight for land, fight for having you have worked for your landlords on his land, and if you go and ask for wages, then you are beaten up. So the right to claim wages, forget about higher wages or decent wages or living wages. The right to claim wages for work that you have done. So this is basically against bondage, against slavery. So right to have some kind of dignity. So from that to the right to exercise your vote. And today, I think that dignity, that right to claim wages, that, it is when our teachers today demand equal pay for equal work, when scheme workers are demanding that we won't work for free, we won't work for just some kind of pittance as honorarium, we want a proper pay scale. So I think it is that whole right to demand your wages. So that dignity has reached a new level today. But essentially, let me just conclude by saying this. It is a battle for dignity. It's the battle for justice. It's the battle for democracy, which has given left its legitimacy, its strength, its mass support. And our constitution had promised us justice, social, economic, and political. And today we have the BJP, we have Modi government, which is going on inflicting injustice, social, economic, and political, which is delivering disaster after disaster, social, economic, and political, which is what fascism is all about, which is the Indian model of fascism. And against this, I think left should emerge as the bulwark, as the champion of fighting for democracy, for securing all those goals, visions enunciated in the preamble of the Constitution. And that's why I find it quite reassuring that the preamble to India's Constitution, if it has popularly emerged as some kind of a manifesto of our times, if people are reading the preamble and that has become the common manifesto of all the people's resistance developing in India today, I think there is nothing really ritualistic or legalistic or formalistic about it. I think this is probably what Ambedkar had in mind, that the soil is getting democratized. People are, something we got probably without really understanding what we got. We got a vote without having even asking for it. In many European countries, even in America, they had to fight for this whole franchise for decades to get the right to vote. In India, we got it as part of the freedom movement package. But today, I think when that constitution is being shelved and being subverted, being just torn asunder, so if the people are fighting with the constitution in their hand and for the values and the commitments made in the constitution, I think that lends a lot of strength and depth to the whole battle for resistance in India for democracy. And in fact, that's what socialism and revolution and the entire communist movement, for me, it's all about. So this is where the situation has brought us today. And I just hope that all sections of the left, we can come together in understanding this juncture. And of course, we are often much lamented and much divided. So I don't really know. So the division in the left, it is there. And some people think that first let us resolve the programmatic differences. I think it never works that way. So differences crop up in a certain conjuncture. They have their own history. And again, it's another circumstances and the process of the movement, which again also takes care of those differences, reduces those differences, resolves those differences, and encourages, triggers a new level of unity. So I see, of course we are divided, but I see a growing potential for unity, a growing urge for unity across the left. And a lot of the theoretical debates, differences, probably they have lost much of their meaning. They are no longer that relevant, that urgent today. They are part of history. So whatever is of urgency today, so that sense of urgency, that sense of purpose, that sense of the present, because after all, when we say we should have a sense of history, but we don't really live in history. We learn from history. History is a big reference point. And if we don't learn, then we are condemned to repeat it. But we live in the present and fight for the future. And so that's why, rather than being bogged down in all those old debates and all these historical kind of references, and I think if we can really fight for the future and pull together all our strengths. So let's build on our strengths and pull our energies and resources together. I'm sure the left in India is very vibrant enough. It has the potential, it has the power, it has the history, and it has the mass support in spite of having lost so many elections, and probably the vote share has gone down. But even, I think, as Bihar has shown, as I think in many other places we can still see, that it is possible for the left not just to fight in the arena beyond elections, but also in the electoral arena and create a space. So all these different battles, there can be growing synergy. We can bring them together, and the left can be the champion of anti-fascist resistance. So I think that's what I had to share with you. And if there are questions, of course, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much for this thought-provoking presentation, comrade. Your presentation made very valid points, and the idea that left revisits its old formulations and left should understand this moment. I think very interesting points you have raised in your presentation. And before I take up the questions which are there, I would invite Comrade Ravi to make some initial comments, and then we can begin the discussion. Comrade Ravi. Yatindra, can you please, please?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Comrade Dipankar, for a very insightful, very comprehensive, very wise words. I think, it is difficult to find anything or find much, in your statement at all to disagree with. It's very heartening, very encouraging, very inspiring for us to hear what you had to say. Thank you for accepting our invitation to speak here, and thank you for once again for very wise, very insightful lecture. I have two curiosities, so to speak. One is you spoke about the social soil. Fascism often gets talked about, at least in our left circles, more in terms of systemic crises, more in terms of monopoly capital, more in terms of in an arena. Do you see, even though there are, you have, I am kind of repeating partly what you said, the importance of social soil. For example, it seems to us culture plays a big role too, without denying the role of systemic crisis. Under the same monopoly capital and under the same crisis, it seems that Germany and Italy were more likely to have fascism than UK or some of the northwestern countries. But without going into, these are not, my curiosity is very practical. When you say that social soil plays a role, do you see a large scale intervention from our side, from left in the social soil prior to revolution? Revolution and socialism sort of changes the social soil. That is part of revolutionary goal. But before revolution happens, before we reach our final battle, do you see in our conditions of India today, left can have some large scale strategy to intervene in the social soil that often runs against us? So that is one curiosity. The other curiosity I have is about the way you said the role of left. I agree with you that the Nehruvian mean we cannot return to, India cannot return to, and always one has to find a higher ground of equilibrium. But left today, do you see left can play that kind of role on that future higher equilibrium? And if not, what does left have to do with itself in order to make itself capable of attaining or capable of playing that higher role in that higher equilibrium? So I will not take more time, and I'll just put these two curiosities. I know these are large subjects, and maybe in future we will be lucky enough to have you again to give separate lectures on these topics. But if you could say a few words on these two curiosities. Thank you. Thank you again.
Should I say something now itself, or should we wait for?
Please go ahead, comment.
Okay. I think to your first question, the answer is of course yes, a very emphatic yes. I would call it the clearing of the soil. So the democratization of the soil and the clearing of the soil. Now, if the social environment is, let's say, hostile, if it is adverse, if it is not conducive to the growth of the left, to the growth of, let's say, class struggle. So definitely, I think, as Marx tells us, that you have to deal with, whatever you have got. So you have this imperfect situation. So you have to deal with it. So that's why I think, for example, in Bihar, what we have been doing, as I said, our basic battle for dignity. So many people thought that this is just a caste war that we are waging. We always said we are not waging a caste war. This is not just, Dalits versus this caste or that caste. It is not that. So it's a very important plank. So I think class struggle, if we even go back to Communist Manifesto and all the basics of Marxist writing, so class struggle itself has all along been, it has never really been only economic. It is political, it is ideological, it is social. Class is after all a social category. Class is not an economic concept, it is not an economic term. So often that's why when Marxists and the left, in a very mechanical and economistic manner, they started reducing class struggle to some only economic kind of struggle. So the entire social arena, other people came and started saying, well, so they Marxists, they don't understand society. So they started telling that we don't understand religion, we don't understand caste. So I always said that no, it's not that we have neglected caste, or in fact, we have neglected religion, we have neglected culture, we have neglected class. We have not understood class, we have not understood what class struggle really means, unless we take care of every aspect of class struggle. So that aspect of class struggle, I think this clearing the social soil is very important. So whatever needs to be done, and there is absolutely no stage theory, there is no doing this thing first and doing that later. All things will have to be done simultaneously, and because we cannot expect the, for example, the bourgeois thinkers, there was a period, for example, in West Bengal, if you go there, so Bengal had a kind of social climate, which probably turned out to be slightly more conducive for the rise of the left, because there is a history of social reform. And that kind of social reform probably in many Hindi areas, Hindi belt, you didn't find. But in fact, the more we study, more we find that it's not that the reforms didn't take place, but somehow we never really focused much on that. So that's why it's important to revisit and highlight all those struggles for education, for social reform, for women's empowerment. So I think that's the first to answer to your first question, that we need to do this. So that entire arena, the social arena is very, very important, absolutely important. Because without that arena, without talking about this social and cultural, I think we won't be understanding fascism in India at all. Because if it is fascism has to be understood only as some growth of monopoly capital. So, I mean, without just monopoly capital can't explain. Without this whole Islamophobia, what has Islamophobia got to do with monopoly capital? What has this whole caste oppression got to do with monopoly capital? So, but this whole mob lynching against Dalits, against women, against Muslims. So it is not just against workers. It's not just against the proletariat or for the economically weak section. So I think to understand fascism in its true Indian context, I think it's very important that we understand, bring in all these social and cultural factors. And there, without coming under pressure. So that's where I think the communist thing will become important. So without coming under ideological pressure of this so-called nationalism, this so-called Hindu supremacist politics, so we have absolutely no points to prove to anybody. We don't have to prove to anybody that we are patriotic. We don't have to prove to anybody that we understand, we respect rationality, that we respect this and respect that. So without having to prove anything, I think because many other parties, they will always come under the ideological pressure of mounted by the fascists. So this is where I think the ideological freedom of communists is important, as just courage and freedom, just as clarity is important. But we need to pay our fullest attention to this. And the second point is, again, I think answer will be quite similar, because the communists will have to play a role both. I mean, of course, we are not really nationally strong enough to play a very key role in terms of, let's say, electorally as the, let's say, the center of some kind of an opposition today. So maybe we'll be, so to say, a bit player in the electoral arena. But I think without compartmentalizing all these roles, if we look at our role as some kind of an integral thing, then all these things are important. So there are things which only the communists can do. There are things which no other anti-fascist trend in India, I can't expect them to do. So all those things we will have to do. But there are many areas where probably we'll have to work together with a lot of other trends. So all kinds of ideas. So as I said, it's that kind of a united front. So it's a united front thing and the independent assertion of communists. So I think again the two go together. The two did not be pitted against each other. And the two should facilitate each other, should promote each other. Like in the freedom movement, we had, as I said in my talk, that basically there are a whole range of ideas, a whole range of trends and tendencies working during the freedom movement. And where the communists, of course, had a very important role to play. They were quite powerful, especially in many areas of India, but also as an ideological current within the freedom movement. But today, maybe we are not that powerful, and because everything has turned right. So it's a very skewed system today. There is sorry.
We have with us Anand Phadke. He belongs to Shramik Mukti Dal, and he has been in the left movement for the last more than 4 decades. And he has participated in some of our meetings also, and contributed to our discussions also. So I would request him to share his comments or share his questions. Anand Phadke. Anand, you are able to hear me?
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you very much for a very excellent overview of the whole issue of Manduvadi corporate Raj that you have made in short time. My only comment is that, yes, we communists have to be consistently democratic and champions of democracy. But however, our track record is somewhat contradictory. On the one hand, there have been excellent examples of valiant fight for democracy. But then it is many times said that you are a Democrat when you are in opposition. And when you come to even governmental power, you cease to be a Democrat. And this has actually happened many times, starting from Soviet Union, difficult conditions, to China, to West Bengal, Singur, as you mentioned. So the track record is not very consistent. And therefore, when we build an anti-fascist front in India, our credentials of consistent champions of democracy are not exactly very consistent. And a lot of work will have to be done to win the confidence of people who are not communists, but they are very clearly anti-fascist. I think that is a big task, and some critical self-thinking is also needed within the left, especially people of our kind like you. I think you have indirectly hinted at that, but I think there has to be something like a much more clearer, not in this session, of course, but at least an internal understanding that our track record is not exactly, well, one party rule, for example. Uh, do we champion one party rule? Things of those kinds of issues that people keep asking. It's not that some theoretical question. When we actually interact with other people in the left movement, there are people who ask those questions. What happened to Medha Patkar when she tried to go to Singhu? All those things everybody knows. And these are not some distant things that happened in Stalin's time. There have been many things which have happened recently also. Or people will argue that yes, your trade unions should be democratic and they should not be on party lines. But most of the trade unions within the left are along the party lines. So if you really truly believe that it's basic class organization and it should be on democratic lines, why is it the need for all kinds of parties, left parties, to have their own trade unions? These are the kinds of questions we need to be faced, which are probably practical questions. Not easy answers, but I think we need to think about it.
Would you like to please come? Would you like to add, comrade? Comrade Dipankar, you're mute. You're mute.
Yeah.
Please.
Sorry, I missed a bit of what Bharti was saying, because I have to recharge my Bluetooth. I think I heard, listened to the last part of his thing. I think he is, of course, he's right. I mean, the track record is not encouraging. Track record, there is a lot of blemishes in our track record. And we'll have to sort of keep reviewing and do it. But I think the democracy question, whatever happened in West Bengal, for example. So I think I'd just like to remind you that if the left in power in West Bengal, they were doing Singhu, if they were preventing Medha Patkar, there were also the left which were actually fighting with the Singhu farmers. And our party, in fact, when the Singhu struggle was started, I mean, it was not started by Trinamool Congress. The people of Singhu, they started resisting. And when they started opposing the land acquisition, ours was the first party, because we were present around Singhu, not exactly in Singhu, but in the neighboring areas we had our organization. We were the first to stand with the Singhu farmers. And in fact, we faced the brunt of repression. Others, of course, all came to Singhu. And so both are part of the left history. That's what we need to understand. A section of the left standing with the Singhu farmers, and a section of the left in power, using that state power against the Singhu farmers. I think now, without getting into a big debate, let's acknowledge that when we talk about the left, it's not a monolithic thing. Within the left, all these strands, all these currents are present. And of course, this is a constant kind of conversation and battle we have to go on, which is state self-criticism, so that the left emerges as more democratic, more pro-people, and more consistent with the ideas of class struggle. That's all. If there is any lack of consistency, any lack of kind of commitment, So the only answer to can be that you become more committed and you become more consistent.
There is a question from Mr. SSP Singh. What is your prescription to defeat fascist Modi regime in this political scenario? What is your prescription to defeat Modi regime?
Yes.
Please. Here you are audible. Yeah.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, can you just briefly repeat? I mean,
what is Mr. SSP Singh wants to know what is your prescription for defeating the Modi regime, fascist Modi regime in this scenario?
I think whatever is available now, as long as there is still democracy available, as long as, am I audible?
Yeah.
So as long as you have this provision still in India, so every attempt should also be made to try and figure out, try and see if it is possible electorally to get rid of this government, to stop it. And so far, of course, we have not been successful, but that is also an important point, important task. And of course, the more important thing is continuing with the people's resistance and intensifying it by all means, expanding it by all means. And as we often say, remind ourselves that fascists come to power through elections by making use of bourgeois democracy, but that's not how you can get rid of the fascists. So it calls for something more than the normal electoral procedure. So let's try and see, I mean, how the history pans itself out in India. So we have to be prepared for that, but let's not make it like some kind of an axiom, because there is fascism, and so in India, how exactly the fascists, because how exactly Hitler would have ended had there been no Second World War, had there been no Red Army, and had it not happened that way, that can become a matter of speculation. So there are different ways in which fascist rules have been brought to an end in different countries. So how exactly the Modi Shahi will be brought to its end in India is something that we will have to, experience, witness, and organize. It's our job to do it. And there, let us try and combine every form of struggle available to us, every avenue available to us, and obviously mobilizing the people, like reaching out to the people who are being misled by the Modi government. I think that's the most important. So, for example, just to give you two examples, when this anti-CA movement started, so the whole Shine Bagh model of protest, that was absolutely fantastic, reassuring for all of us, very inspiring, very energizing. But then this was predominantly Muslim. The participants in Shine Bagh, they were all predominantly Muslim. And it was very important that communists tried to correct that perception. So that can be corrected only by making sure that large sections of Hindu people are also participating in these Shaheen Bagh modes of protest. So if thousands of Muslim women are there, to try and also mobilize a few hundreds of Hindu women. If we don't do that, then the ground remains open for the BJP to create its own mischievous narrative and tell the people that it's all about Muslims demanding something. It's a separatist kind of a movement. I think to an extent we tried to do it, but I think I would have been happy if all sections of Indian communists, rather than treating the Shaheen Bagh as some kind of a ready-made audience and ready-made opportunity to deliver speeches and sing songs and raise slogans, if we had paid more attention to doing that hard groundwork of taking the message to people who are being misled by the Modi government, that would have been more relevant. Similarly, today, the farmers' protest, it is certainly a protest of all Indian farmers, all sections of farmers. But today, suddenly you will find that all these years we have been blamed that peasants are a community, and it is the communists who are discovering classes within the peasant. It is communists who talk about rich farmers, kulaks and middle peasants and poor peasants and landless peasants and so on and so forth. And today, when we are talking about a farmers' movement, suddenly the BJP tells you that it's the rich farmers' movement. It's the Punjabi, pampered kulaks. It's their movement. And these are people who wear jeans and eat pizza and speak in English. It's their movement. So culturally, socially, by every means, they are trying to again mislead the broad sections of Indian peasant. So I think now again we have this job on our hands. How do we explain to the poor landless peasant in Bihar? How do we explain it to the poor landless peasant in Tamil Nadu that it is this whole battle against these three farm bills? It is not just the Punjab rich farmers battle. It's equally a battle of the landless poor who's battling for food security, who's battling for minimum wages, who's battling for a small piece of land or maybe rice sharecropper. So this is a very important task to do. So even when we are talking about the ongoing developing resistance, I think there are crucial areas that need greater attention, that needs greater emphasis and hard work. So rather than just celebrating the way the resistance is shaping up, because if the resistance remains slightly lopsided, if it appears to be slightly lopsided, then the ground is open for the BJP to spread all kinds of distorted messages and mislead the people. So I think the important thing for us is to deepen the resistance, spread the messages far and wide, make it loud and clear. So these are areas where I think within the same battle, there are different jobs that people should be performing at the same time. And that's where I see a different role for communists in these resistance struggles.
We have with us Shuddhavarata Senagupta. He's a radical scholar and journalist. If he's able to hear me, I request him to share his comment and raise question. Shuddha.
Yes.
Please.
Thank you, Comrade Dipankar. Very interesting to listen to you. I have one question which is to do with what I think is probably the options left to this regime. I think there will be sooner or later, over the last year we've seen this, a greater attention to the attempt at doing militarist adventures in the neighborhood. The reason I'm saying this is that there are many similar struggles going on in Bangladesh and Pakistan, even in Iran, of farmers and workers. Do you think there is a possibility that the left in India can produce greater levels of coordination so that in the event of a military adventure, there is a coordinated resistance in the South Asian region?
I think you've made a very important point, because this is precisely, I think these are the escape routes that they are probably looking at. And this is precisely what happened during the last Lok Sabha election. Because already we had a very powerful farmers movement and youth movement over employment building up. And then Pulwama happened. The entire discourse changed. And even in this Bihar elections, we found one important reason why we managed to win a degree of success is because we could make sure that the election agenda, it revolved around issues of like employment, jobs, equal pay for equal work, and all those other education, health, all those other things which are important for people's life. The BJP tried its level best to talk about Kashmir, to talk about Ayodhya. Yogi Adityanath offered that I will give you free darshan of Ram Mandir once it is built. So, and they said that, well, people are demanding land and houses, shelter rights in Bihar. And they were promising now that Article 370 has been done away with. You can go and buy land and buy plots and buy flats in Kashmir. So they were trying their level best to talk about all these things, but somehow we managed to ensure that the people didn't allow the BJP to run away with the election and to divert the agenda. So certainly, I mean, as the resistance grows, the BJP will definitely try. And here, better coordination within the left in India, within the left in South Asia. I think greater understanding is very important. But unfortunately, right now, I think forget about battling against this kind of military adventures. But even the threat perception about the BJP, that's again, I think, not really uniform among the left. I'm pretty finding very disturbing that even in West Bengal, for example, a state which we commonly associate with the longest legacy and glorious legacy of the left. And unfortunately, that's one state where the people treat the BJP, many people are treating BJP as an unknown quantity. And they are willing to give the BJP a chance just to see, I mean, how it looks like, what it feels like to have a BJP government. And we have had a left discourse there, which doesn't distinguish between the BJP and the Trinamool Congress. And even now, when the debate has become so sharp, there are people who are constantly telling us that these are two facets of the same coin, and so on and so forth. So I think the first thing should be, I think, commonality about the perception. Whether you call it fascism, call it not, call it by any name one like. But let us understand the gravity of the danger, what are the things at stake, and then once this common threat perception is there, let us try and unite in terms of, not all can do all kinds of things. So without belittling one particular mode of resistance, one arena of resistance, so let us give respect to all people the way they are trying to do. So that mutual recognition, coordination, this will be very important. And then certainly, I think it will be possible for it is not just for the left to do it. I think once, for example, look at the farmers, how brilliantly the Punjab farmers, when they are here, now the BJP cannot try and tell them that the border means Jana hai or kya hai and all that. So there's no way you can pit the Punjab farmers, the army against the Punjab farmers. So this is, I think, once we grow, all these possibilities, let's remember that all these possibilities are also there. So the BJP has its options, but we also have any number of options. That's what the diversity and the long history of India's democratic and social struggles give us.
Thank you.
My query is that, comrade, my personal query, why things have come to such a pass in Bengal, sort of, say Bengal or any where the left was so dominant once, and now you have a possibility of a right-wing force emerging, is on the ascendant. So what lessons we can draw from it? What went wrong with our practice, or the left practice, or understanding of things?
I think probably many things have really gone wrong, and unfortunately they have gone wrong around the same time, at the same time, and all these wrongs they are kind of converging, militating in favor of the BJP. As of now, I can see three things. It is not just for the left which has gone wrong. Three things which are going in favor of the BJP, and one is the anti-left kind of politics which has been unleashed. And there is a certain, of course, the left also has to take some role, some blame for it, because as I said, 34 years, of course, one could say it's a natural thing for a government to come to an end after 34 long years. So that fatigue among the people, or the yearning for some kind of change. So, okay, but beyond that, I think there are major mistakes committed by the left government, especially towards the end, which discredited the left government and created some kind of fatigue among the people. And so that anti-left thing, both the anti-CPM, that anti-incumbency still continues, and of course the TMC and now the BJP, they are trying to consciously, deliberately give it a very anti-left kind of direction. So that anti-left thing is working in BJP. Then there is the anti-TMC, anti-incumbency against anti-TMC rule, and not just against TMC rule, against Mamata Banerjee's kind of image and style. So it's somewhat similar to the kind of ridicules that Lalu Yadav used to face. We had any number of differences or opposition to Lalu Yadav, but oppose him on policy matters, on principles. But that kind of elitist, snobbish kind of rejection of these kind of leaders. So Mamata Banerjee, of course, in Bengal, Bhadralok, there are a lot of people who can't tolerate, and so there is an anti-Mamata thing too, and then the anti-Muslim Islamophobia, and Bengal runs deep. This whole communal polarization, it runs deep, goes back to the freedom movement in earlier. So all these things are currently militating in favor of the BJP and helping the BJP. And unfortunately, I think 2011 to 2016, the first 5 years of Mamata Banerjee, I think the CPIM let these years go waste. Because the first is when attacks started on CPM offices, CPM brands, and there was little bit of attempt to resist it. And that gave the first kind of incentive, first bit of excuse to move towards the BJP for safety, for protection. And probably the CPM thinking was that, well, they didn't bargain for it. They didn't think that things could change so drastically. So they were probably thinking in bipolar terms. After 5 years of Mamata rule, people get dissatisfied, disillusioned, fed up. So they will keep coming back again to the left, as things happen in Kerala, let's say. So Bengal will now go on the Kerala borderline. But what actually happened is, meanwhile, 2014 happened, Modi came to power, the whole political landscape changed, and it changed in Bengal too. And so now it has become kind of a very inexorable kind of a thing. And very unfortunate that the CPM vote share has gone down to only 7% in 2019 Lok Sabha election. So that huge vote share, close to 50%, which the left had, which was kind of the inheritance, collective inheritance of decades of struggle. So that inheritance, it was our duty to protect and safeguard that inheritance, develop that inheritance. But that inheritance has now been frittered away like anything, and left like yesterday or day before yesterday when Adhikari joined the BJP, we heard that one CPM MLA, one CPI MLA also joined. It's not just TMC or Congress. So that kind of erosion, that kind of desertion, which is very disturbing, very unfortunate, but that has also happened. But anyway, I think whatever has happened has happened. So now what's important is we need to acknowledge it and stop it. So we are trying our level best in Bengal now. Of course, we don't really have the kind of organizational muscle or electoral influence that we have in Bihar. Bengal is not comparable at all. But still, with our limited strength, we are trying to sensitize, because we believe that there is still a strong, big left liberal constituency in Bengal, and there are any number of people who are really disturbed by this whole prospect that Bengal might go the BJP way. So but this voice was muted. Somehow this whole consciousness was numbed. So we are trying our best to make this voice strong. And secondly, to try and develop an agenda in Bengal, like in Bihar, so that the election doesn't become a very, something just limited to only what the state government is guilty of. So, because now it really is irrelevant. The kind of centralization that is happening in India, the way the Modi government is bulldozing every state government, there is a little bit of federalism left. So you talk about every issue, it's essentially the blame must lie at the center's doorstep. So you talk about COVID, you talk about lockdown, you talk about privatization, you talk about unemployment, you talk about agrarian crisis, you talk about education, so everything. So I think that's why it's very important in Bengal election to make sure that not just the TMC government which should be held accountable, but more importantly, the Modi government should also be held accountable in the Bengal election. So the election is to hold both these governments accountable. So if we can do that, and the election becomes less about just somehow getting rid of this government or that government, this kind of Modi versus DD kind of binary, the BJP versus TMC kind of the binary, and if people issues can come to the forefront, then I think some degree of uh, rationality, some degree of sense will be restored, and that will give you a different kind of electoral outcome. So, and probably the left can regain a bit of its lost. So, it need not be. Right now, it appears to be a bipolar election where the left Congress combined appears to be a very distant third going by 2019 results. Going by 2019, the left Congress alliance, of course, the alliance also didn't take shape. So it appears to be a very distant third. We in CPIML, we are not part of this left Congress understanding. We are in an independent capacity there. But our attempt will be to try and make sure that even let the Bengal election become triangular, truly triangular. If it becomes truly triangular and not just a bipolar election, and if people have the option, people are told that the main job is to defeat BJP, so they will know, I mean, who is the best bet, which constituency. I think with that kind of a clarity, singular kind of approach, and with stronger organization on the ground, it should be possible still. But of course, it's very keeping my fingers crossed for Bengal, because the margin was, the difference was only 3% in 2019 Lok Sabha, 40% for the TMC, 40% for the BJP. That was the kind of difference you had. And of course, in Bihar and Jharkhand, we saw that the Lok Sabha and assembly elections are, of course, different ball games. In Jharkhand, just 6 months before the assembly election, the NDA swept the Lok Sabha elections, but then they lost power in the assembly election. In Bihar, we came so close to defeating the NDA, almost. But then we must remember that in Jharkhand and Bihar, it was the NDA which was the power. And additionally, in Jharkhand, it's an Adivasi kind of state, and it had an Adivasi chief minister all along. But BJP tried to impose a non-Adivasi chief minister. And so there was an additional anti-incumbency for the Governor. And that's why it became probably slightly easier for us to isolate the NDA and develop that kind of electoral resistance. In Bengal, it could be the other way around. People might think that this Lok Sabha election was a semi-final, and the final is being played now. So it might still be seen only in the Bengal context. But still, I think it should be possible, given the current climate of farmers' movement, the growing crisis in the country, and the expanding frontiers of people's resistance. If we could lend this, Bengal could absorb a bit of this heat and energy and inspiration from all these struggles, then the election battle could still look different, and the agenda could be slightly different, and it should still be possible. And not just in Bengal, I think Assam too needs to get rid of the BJP government, because in both these states, the BJP has been really playing a role.
This is the last question for today's discussion. Shamik Bhattacharya ji wants to know from you if it is possible to have a consortium of all left political organizations in the country to further people's protests in a more organized manner.
I think it should be possible, and more than possible, it is necessary. And if it is necessary, then we should also find ways of make it possible and feasible. Of course, it has been difficult, but I think some better coordination is happening now. I think, let's say, in the last 10 years, and especially after the arrival of Modi, we have greater understanding, greater coordination. But all it calls for is greater respect within the left, mutual respect, understanding. So whether it's a big party or a small party, somebody specializing in a particular arena of, let's say, left movement, somebody only in the working class movement, some people doing work only on the cultural front, some are doing, say, the grassroots, some peasant struggle. So I know, but there are a lot of prejudices and a lot of kind of preconceived, fixed ideas about different sections of the left among all of us. I think it's important to shed that, shed all those prejudices, and be realistic, respect all sections of the left for whatever work they are doing, and with this level of mutual respect, recognition, and readiness to work together, it should be possible. And increasingly, I find that people are actually coming together, coming close.
I think many thanks for this excellent presentation and the guidance you've given to the left movement in the country.
I think I have kind of exceeded my brief, exceeded my time limit, and so thank you all so much for bearing with me. And but I enjoyed listening to the comments and delivering this talk. And I hope that this dialogue continues.
I have to make a small announcement. We are organizing a special lecture next Sunday. Dr. Jaya Mehta, who is a leading economist, we have invited her to speak on the farmers' movement and related issues. Next Sunday, she will be there 6 p.m. A special lecture by Jaya Mehta. Once again, many thanks, comrade.
Thank you.